How does a college music department define music when it comes to their curriculum? How do they decide what they want students to know leaving their program? And is the answer to that question different from what students should know when leaving their program? Welcome to Zeitgeist Radio, where we learn about musical subcultures from people in the scene. I'm Morgan Rowe, and this week I'm speaking with a college music professor who has been tasked with building the music history program at his school. When you think about it, that's a hell of a responsibility. My guest today is Dr. Chris Gable, a composer, author, and professor at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Chris, welcome to Zeitgeist Radio.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You were one of my first ever music professors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Way back
You set
when.
the stage for a long journey for me.
Yes.
So, I would love for you to share for our audience, how would you describe yourself musically?
Well, I'm a composer, but I actually started my first inklings of like composition, I guess, were I would call them cheesy love songs for girlfriends and things. And it was a good way a way in to the idea of, putting notes, not necessarily on a page at that point, but coming up with a chord progression, that was my own, and words that were my own. And I even I borrowed a friend's 4-track recorder. It was like a little cassette 4-track recorder, and I made a very low quality recording of one of the songs one summer, and I was pretty proud of that. I think that I think of myself as a composer because that's how I engage with music. So I write music, yes, but I listen to it in a different way than maybe, like a clarinet player or a singer, or a rock drummer, because the rock drummer, they'll listen to, the drumming patterns, and that's what they are focusing on in some ways. And I focus on things like chord progressions that I like, kind of weird time signatures, things that interest me, but are not too complex that they sort of lose the audience. There's some music out there that it's so dense that it's hard to let people in. I think in both, prog rock and also, contemporary classical music, there are both and also modern jazz. There are some genres that they have this kind of avant-garde complex side to them, which is really fun to play, I bet, but it's hard for a listener to get into. So I'm kind of a composer that doesn't go there. I'm not an avant-garde composer at all. I try to write accessible music that is, tuneful and hopefully, well crafted. Occasionally I get into, a little bit more experimental things. One of my teachers, Stephen Paulus, he said you should always try something new in every piece that you do. Try, even if it's just a little thing, just try a new technique or try a new form, or an instrument that you've never written for, something like that. I think that's really good advice. You just don't sort of do the same thing, and don't recycle yourself, because that can lead to burnout or boredom in your audience.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the challenges of being a contemporary composer, is how to reach an audience, how to engage with an audience. And who is that audience? That's a really primary question. um, I know a lot of uh, band composers who write for wind ensemble, and they're very successful, meaning they make a lot of money. They are writing for a particular purpose, and that
Yeah.
is to generate new wind ensemble music for high school bands, for middle school bands, and that's a laudable thing. um but it never they're very safe compositions. A lot
Yeah.
of them, they are very accessible. They also sound very similar to each other, and so that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's sort of like, it feels like recycled music in a way. um there's some great stuff out there. I'm not saying that everything is recycled, but um it's a danger, I think, that a composer can fall into. um and I hope that I don't do that, but um
Well, I'm more of a choral singer. I've continued in choir after college pretty much nonstop, and I still sing in several ensembles. And in the choral world, you kind of have the same thing where even composers who are well known as being creative, the people that come to mind are Morton Lauritsen and Eric Whitaker. They both are more known on the cultural level, I think, than the many other choral composers. But there are certain methods that they use over and over and over and over. Like, you're like, oh, that's the Whitaker chord, that's the Lauritsen chord. So
yeah,
even with the challenge of being, even though they are kind of more on that creative side and they are often doing new things in their pieces, they also have found something that works and recycle
yeah,
that thing
and they
over and
use
over
that. Yeah,
because
right.
it works. I don't blame them at all.
Yeah,
But yeah, that
right.
sounds like a tricky line to balance. So,
Yeah.
who do you write for? What types of ensembles do you write for most now?
So a lot of my recent stuff has been for specific people that that are commissions from faculty, colleagues at UND, um, or people that I know in, kind of regionally. So mostly it's been instrumental music lately. So I did a set of pieces for left hand piano recently, and I did a set of cello and piano pieces a couple years ago, a trombone octet for the UND trombone octet, um, and various things like that. So um, I guess I'm pretty lucky because people keep asking me to write music, and they usually pay me some.
That's such a win.
not, not a huge amount, but yeah. But it's, it's kind of like, it looks good on a CV, and like, commissioned by the North Dakota
Yeah.
Museum of Art or whatever. um so I'm in a position, my academic job, it does not include creative activity or research, so that's not officially part of my job. So it's sort of like a thing that I do. I still love to write music, and I'm always doing some sort of project. Um, but it's not like I'm a kind of an ivory tower composer, like
Yeah.
a tenured composer who just writes you know,
Yeah.
for themselves or something. I don't know. That's a stereotype, but
You're right.
I'm more. I feel like I'm more of a um, I'm more of a Benjamin Britten than a uh, Milton Babbitt, I guess, because Britten was very much engaged with his community, and he wrote for people. He wrote for children's choirs and amateurs, and also, you know, Julian Bream and Rostropovich, and so because he had those connections, but um, that's kind of the composer that I like to be. I want to be a more public kind of person. Um, and yeah, and it's also satisfying. It's a great feeling to have a piece performed, and
I bet it is.
when
Yeah.
people actually remember to have you stand up, which doesn't always happen, by
Oh
the way.
no.
Yeah,
Oh
not always.
no.
One time, can I tell you a fun story?
Sure.
One time I had a piece, premiere of a piece that was down in, and I wrote it. Well, I didn't write it for this high school, but the Fargo North High School, they happened to perform it first, and um, the lights were really bright on the stage, and so the conductor, after the piece, he turned around. He had no idea where I was sitting.
Right.
He turned around and he was like looking like this and like his hand over his eyes and looking. And right at the end of the piece, a guy on the far end of the hall, he stood up to go to the bathroom.
So
And
he pointed.
the conductor pointed at him and he was like clapping for the guy who was walking away.
Some random guy. Oh
And
no.
I stood up eventually and I just tried to wave, but I don't think the conductor ever saw me.
Oh no.
That was very funny.
This great piece written by some random guy.
The guy who was leaving the auditorium.
Oh, that must have been
Yes.
awkward for him too. He's like, I just gotta go.
Yeah, sorry. And it wasn't even that long of a piece, it's
Right.
not like it was a huge 30-minute thing where you couldn't leave. So anyway,
Oh dear.
um another side of me is I do write songs, and I'm teaching an introduction to songwriting class every spring, and so I try to keep that side of my writing life active. And so I sometimes I write songs to show them, just as examples. But it's also kind of fun, and I've written songs every once in a while over the years, like, once again, cheesy love songs.
That's great.
or other songs, usually like guitar and voice kinds of songs. So
Do you have a definition or a line in your head, like a difference between being a composer and a songwriter? Are they different
yeah,
things to you?
that's a really good question, and I think that they are different. The reason that I say that is that I had to kind of make a distinction in teaching up at the International Music Camp, because I teach there in the summers, and it's for high school kids. And it used to be called music composition. That was the name of the week. And I suggested, I think we should really change this to music composition and songwriting, because I don't care whether the kids can read music or not. If they are really great songwriters without the kind of the notation background, that's totally fine. And that's, I think, the the difference. I think that if it's a notated style, then it's composition. If it's not,
Hmm.
it's songwriting. That's a really general statement, but it usually works. And I think that most people who consider them songwriters, they're not they're not thinking, even if they can read music, they're not really thinking about notation when they're writing a song. I know I don't.
Right.
I think about a chord pattern and
Yeah.
like, let's find a melody that can work here, but I don't really notate it, you know. Uh, so I do think that they're different. I think that there are some songwriters who absolutely they're veering on the composer side.
Yeah.
Like a good example is Bjork. Her stuff is really complex, and probably a lot of it is notated. I know it is. Um, and I think Saint Vincent also, she has musical training. Um, So there are folks who do that, and kind of they blur that line between composition and songwriting. But yeah, I guess I'm gonna go out on a limb and say yeah, they are different.
Yeah.
Um,
He's
but
making faces.
I'm not totally comfortable with that difference, but they are different in terms of how the music is produced, I would say.
One thing I always really loved about taking music theory from you was you would kind of genre smash and you would use pop or rock, other like contemporary artists to illustrate, very historically based
Mhm.
chord progressions or, whatever concept it was at the time.
Mhm.
Kind of, and it was really cool because it made it feel relevant, like
Mhm.
you'd bring in stories of Bjork or Rush. Rush was a
Mhm.
frequent.
Yeah,
We have a collective memory of Chris Gable and Rush.
yeah, exactly.
But there was a purpose to it. You'd get excited about like, hey, this is how it was with Mozart. And then, hey, look, it's still happening now.
Exactly.
So I'm always curious your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And and it's like, a good song includes good counterpoint. you know
Right.
there is like physical and identifiable reasons why this is a quality piece of music, in terms of, I should say, in terms of like, which a lot of, it's a controversial statement, but the music itself, right? That
Yeah.
phrase, like,
Yeah.
it's only about the notes, but that's not really what I mean. But I think that the way that I listen to music, I like to hear a a meaning behind the notes, as
Yeah.
well as the lyrics. And so it's not just about the lyrics, but it's also about how is the music expressing the lyrics, and do they go together, do they conflict with each other? Sometimes they do, and that's really interesting too. But most of the time, it's a happy text, it's a happy sound. you
Yeah.
know it's a sad text, it is usually a happy, usually a sad sound, but not always.
Yeah.
um, so there, great example of that is the Smiths, Morrissey songs. He like incredibly dark lyrics, and he sets them to these bouncy beats, and it's actually really funny and ironic, but that's his style. Um, and so I guess I'm saying that, there are some popular songs that I like more than others, and part of that is because of, the notes themselves, like the counterpoint, the chord progression, the melody, the rhythmic interest. And that's of course it's subjective and it's personal opinion, but again, I'm going back to the point of like, this is how I listen to music because I'm a composer,
Yeah.
and I hear things maybe differently than others. So
Well, let's kind of follow that line of thought because one of the things that we were talking about discussing on this episode, we could talk for probably, I mean, you could come back for a dozen episodes easy, I'm sure.
yeah,
But one of them was like even getting into the definition of music, like what is music?
yeah,
So I'm really curious to see where your head is at on this.
yeah. So this is a thing that's been bugging me for a while, and it started with when I started teaching the rock history class. Okay, so it's called the History of Rock and Roll, and
So
be,
epic.
because that is a phrase. It's a title of a class which is used, in several institutions, I'm
Yep.
sure all over the world, really, because people know what that means, or sometimes it's called rock history.
Yeah.
um but in my first couple classes, I explained that it's not just rock. You think of rock as Van Halen AC/DC, kind of hair bands, Led Zeppelin. There's this very small definition of rock, but this class is going to be a really large definition of rock, and it really means popular music. However, it doesn't mean I try to limit it to not Broadway. That's also
Sure.
popular music.
Sure.
And not like, I don't know, easy listening.
Mhm.
And there's certain types of popular music that we don't really cover because of time, but also it doesn't really feel like it doesn't really belong with this most people's definition of rock. However, things like rap and hip hop, it does. There's so much crossover, especially now with rap and rock, that you can't ignore it. And so that was where I started. Like I thought, okay, well, this is a rock history class. Great. Then I started thinking about the fact that at our institution, you can get a music education major, you can finish a music education major and never take a class on popular music.
Ah, yes.
And I have some problems with that.
Yeah,
And
Ian and I have talked about this
yeah,
so much since college, actually.
yeah. And so you look at the side of the building and it says music,
Right.
and it says music department. But it, like, my question is it really a music department? I mean, or is it a band and choir department?
Yeah.
I'm talking about my institution. I think McAllister does a wonderful job of like world music. We do very little world music. We have like one semester of a class called Music and Culture, and it's taught by somebody who's not even a trained ethnomusicologist. And I have a feeling there's a lot of schools out there that they're in the same boat. And so, we have this thing, this field called music, but it's a very incomplete definition of music. Like, what is music,
Yeah.
really? And the traditional music department, like if you look at like Cambridge University or something, I don't know, I'm picking on them, I don't know why, but a very traditional music department, they focus on notated Western European music. And actually, and even we can even go further, they don't even talk about band music, because it's vocal and choral and orchestral music and chamber music, of course, but orchestral music, chamber music using the orchestral instruments. And that's another part of this sort of discrimination. And band directors, they complain about that all the time too, because it's like, oh, you're teaching history of music, how much do you talk about band music? How much do you talk about Jimi Hendrix? How much do you talk about Chuck Berry? And so I look at it as like, what do we want our students to end up with when they're finished? And I think that there are discussions about this all over the country, and sometimes people are trying to change the curriculum to reflect exactly that, so that it is more it's more sort of egalitarian. And of course it means you're going to have to get rid of some of the Western European art music. And I'm in a unique position now, because I was granted I was given the music history sequence at our school now. So because the previous guy retired, and he was a wonderful man, very much of the old school, and he was the big old doorstop grout book, and didn't really know much about popular music really, and was a medieval and Renaissance specialist. So they got a lot of that information, but is that really that important?
I know some people who would say yes, but
Yeah,
but
right.
yeah, I'll just share this personal story. I've shared this a lot, which is the summer after I graduated. You know, I moved straight from McAllister back home to Montana before moving to Portland, and my brother plays guitar. He does a lot of bluegrass. He jams a lot with his friends, and I had just gotten this shiny fresh music degree, and they were like, "Come jam," and I was petrified. I could not jam,
Mm-hmm.
and I've spent the last like however many years since graduation trying to learn how to be comfortable in an ensemble, like just like a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of people with guitars. There's a keyboard in the corner, or maybe I pick up a little bit of guitar and just playing the chords with nothing written. It was so hard for me.
Yeah,
And it was embarrassing because I just have this brand new degree. It's right here.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I couldn't do the most what in many ways is the most basic musical interaction, which is just
Mm-hmm.
playing music together. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And that's another thing that we don't really stress is improvisation,
Yeah.
unless you're in a jazz ensemble, and
Yep.
you know,
And then
then
it's
it's,
jazz improv, which is
which is a different thing.
yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of it's a very strange field in that respect. It's sort of like, oh yes, we're the chemistry department, but we only teach this kind of chemistry, right?
Right.
For other kinds of chemistry, you have to go to a different school. You know, that doesn't make any sense
Right.
when you talk about a chemistry department.
Yeah.
But in music, it's really, really like traditionally, it's very focused and very narrow. Um,
So how does your approach to music history take this in? Like what did you tweak?
well, I guess that's still the jury is still out on that. This is my fourth year teaching this sequence. I just started, music history one. And one idea that I had, which I think is working, is the first half of the semester, I'm just blowing through everything. I'm going as fast as I can, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical. Boom. Then second half, we're gonna go back and go into depth and talk about individual composers and pieces, and way more kind of detailed discussions of things, and probably more score analysis and things. We haven't really done any score analysis really to speak of now. Um, and I think that usually works or that format works for me, because otherwise I tend to get kind of bogged down like my predecessor did in all these cool pieces. And I have to talk about, Bing Schwa and, Dufay and all of these really cool pieces that they wrote, and see how it works together and stuff. And then I end up and it's already December, and I'm, oh, and here's Bach, like really quickly I have to shove in J.S. Bach, because otherwise we have to, and so that just I got behind, and then I felt really bad because the first year I think I taught it, I only spent like 2 weeks, if at all, on the 20th century, and that drove me crazy. And so that's why I'm doing this kind of half and half model, like a big quick survey and then in detail. I also I eventually I do want to somehow include popular music in the second semester. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work yet. I want to touch on Broadway and jazz, because
Mm-hmm.
those are also two important genres that get kind of discounted
Mm-hmm.
in academia. but it's challenging. There's because a lot of content, right? And right now, I don't think there's any way for us to add another semester, for example, of music history. They're cutting things, like our music education degree, we had to cut we had to cut out 3 credits or 3 or 4 credits from the music side of their curriculum because they had to teach more in the education side. And we didn't have a choice.
Right.
So yeah, those are the kinds of things that we deal with now because I guess I'm sort of a older member of the department now, so I am thinking about curriculum and like, well, what are we gonna? How can we fix this? And luckily, the people in my department are very open to change, and they know it's a problem.
So, I have some thoughts about this topic. One thing some of my music department friends and I have talked about, including Ian, who is mentioned a few times here, he also wrote the music for Zeitgeist Radio and was a guest way back in episode 4. Anyway, we've talked over the years about our Theory 4 classes. So we're talking pretty advanced senior year classes. By this point, we were in the 20th century and a strong canon hadn't had time to really be established yet. Many of the folks we studied were still alive. History doesn't know who's influential yet. We learned about some weird projects in radical atonality and really out there electronic stuff. Let's just say the listening exercises were not very pleasant. For me, maybe there's others out there that loved it, but I was not one of them. But you know who else has really incredible, intricate, innovative music theory? Stephen Sondheim, creator of West Side Story, Sweeney Todd, Into the Woods, and tons of other Broadway musicals. When you analyze his music, he's a genius. He's scary, but he's a genius. But apparently, because it was Broadway maybe, my school thought it was more important for me to learn about some seriously niche, eclectic stuff I would 1000% never listen to again than people like Sondheim. And we won't even talk about some of the super talented popular composers or influential musicians out there. Chris has mentioned Chuck Berry, and I think he's an excellent example. Sometimes these pop composers used the exact concepts we were talking about in class, but I guess because they were in the pop or rock music realm, they weren't even touched on. Of all the wonderful classes I took in my college days, I think Theory 4 and 20th century music history were the ones I questioned most after school. Like, sure, I had a few takeaways, but it also kind of makes me mad because I also see what it could have been. Like Chris said, the word music is on the side of the building, but there sure is a lot being ignored that I honestly think is pretty important. And hey, if you're still listening and you think it's important to learn about all the wonderful ways that music shows up in this world, you'll definitely want to sign up for my newsletter. You can do that at zeitgeistacademy.com/radio. In a way, I guess I'm still looking to fill those holes in my education, while also realizing that the content I did learn about in school can be explored way deeper than we had time for in class. Okay, enough of a rant from me. Let's head back to the interview. I imagine as a professor, like, you know, people who have entire careers in Renaissance, right?
Yeah.
Or entire careers in jazz. So how in the world can you get all of this information to students knowing that they're going to do 5 million different things with it when they leave?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I come at it from the kind of the outcome based thing. So what do I want them to know at the end of the year? That's really the main question. And there's the word that Mark Mazzullo especially hates. What should they know?
Right.
He doesn't like the word should. But it's a valid question, and most of our majors are music ed majors. So they're going to be in front of kids. They're going to be in front of a high school band. Do they really need to know about Anton Webern? Maybe not, but
That'd be a weird early music program, early childhood music program.
You're right. But here's the thing. They do need to know that the 12 tone system is a thing.
Yeah.
And they need to know like basically how it works. That kind of thing is what I'm getting at. Like what are the broad strokes? Like what are the, like, even like something as simple as when did Mozart live? Some of these kids, they walk into my classroom, they have no idea.
Yeah.
As juniors in college and their music majors, they don't know. There's a lot of basic stuff that I think is basic that they don't know. And that's the kind of thing that I try to get at, like their basic knowledge that I don't know if it's assumed, but it's pretty important. Like if you're going to go into the music education field, there are certain things you should know and should be able to do. And so that's where I'm coming from music history. I don't actually teach right now. I'm not teaching a whole lot of theory, partially because I'm doing history. So that's really forced me to think about this in a curricular way.
I mean, can we take a step back for a minute and realize such power you have, because you're basically deciding canon.
Uh-huh. Yes,
you are building the canon.
I know, for these kids.
They will not know any different. To them, this is canon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I started writing an article. I don't know. I'm probably going to try to work on it some more. But it's basically the idea of a rock history canon. Like, is there one, first of all?
Yeah.
And who decides?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to kind of think about what makes a song canonical. And it's I think it's fascinating because, and you're probably very aware of this too, but because your anthropology background, but the fact that Seven Nation Army is one of the most common tunes that you hear in soccer games, probably even American football too, but it's like people start singing it when they score, and that's a relatively recent song.
Yeah, it is.
And it's like, how did that happen? That's fascinating to me.
One might say there's a zeitgeist in here somewhere.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
Sometimes things are created or born that just hit.
The way
the culture's ready to receive.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And also, a song like Don't Stop Believin'.
Yeah.
That it sort of did this, and now it's everywhere. Everybody of a certain age and they know that song and they can sing it. Bohemian Rhapsody, also canonical. And so that kind of thing is, I want to somehow actually make a list. I know that people have tried this in the past, like Braille Marcus especially. He has a book, and there's a couple other books that try to explain rock and roll in 10 songs, or just because it makes a good book title or something. But the choices that he makes are very odd, and he's basically using them to sort of prove a point, or to prove a point that he already believes himself. And so I don't totally buy all of that, but also I don't think you can just choose 10 songs.
Yeah, no.
I think it's way more than that.
In the last decade, maybe.
Yeah. And then, the other thing about canon is I find myself, I make a playlist for each unit or chapter or whatever, for both my rock history class and my music history class. And I have to make it can't be too long, because the kids will just hate me. And So I really try to limit it to, 8 to 10 songs, 8 to 10 tracks, really. And some of them are longer than others, but that basic number, it forces me to make decisions about, well, why am I including this?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I excluding this? Do I have more than one song from one artist? And in most cases I don't, but then in some cases I do, like the Beatles. I think the Beach Boys, I have multiple songs, because they had such different, style periods and stuff. So that's one thing that I do. I think they're possibly the only bands I did that with. Perhaps the Rolling Stones. They show up on a couple lists. Um, but that's that sort of act of really, really essential recordings it's a really interesting
That sounds
exercise.
hard. Yeah.
It is hard. It is hard. And I have to do that with, medieval music too. And some of that is based on what's available, and, you know, and also, like, what do I think the kids would like,
Right.
because I don't want to just totally turn them off to this music. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting kind of part of my job. And I like it. I like
Yeah.
that part. It is fun. But it's true. I do have a lot of power in, in
You
this
really do.
in this field, and I try to not let my own, biases get in the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know. Like, how do you describe Igor Stravinsky in one piece? And I
Right.
think most people would say, "Oh, well, Rite of Spring." And that's usually what happens. Is that's what I put on. Is okay, it's Rite of Spring. Now there's my Stravinsky.
Right. Right.
Even though there's so much more that I could say.
Yeah. Well, because what those kids are going to take away, again, just from my perspective, being a student, is what am I going to hear? Like on the radio,
In
on
the
like what's
world,
going to
yeah.
be performed in the world once I leave college, and will I be able to immediately say, oh yeah, that's Stravinsky, and is it close enough to the style? Maybe I don't know every single work by somebody. Let's just take Beethoven. I may not have listened to everything, but do I know enough of his style from the listening that I did do to say, I think that's probably Beethoven. So, like,
Right.
if I can get close, I consider
Mhm.
that a win at least.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about another thing that in our correspondences. Tell me about Sergeant Pepper. What's
Oh,
what's
yeah.
special about Sergeant Pepper, other than it's an amazing album? But
Yeah. So I gave a presentation at the Popular Culture Association national conference in San Antonio in 2023, spring of 2023. And my basically my thesis was that, um, the the song sequence of Sergeant Pepper is very important and integral to the whole experience of the album. So, and one of the things that I talked about was the key relationships between the songs. So the whole thing starts in G, and you kind of travel through various keys and stuff. The first side ends on E minor. The second side starts in C sharp, which is really interesting.
interesting.
And then the whole thing ends on, well, I should say, the reprise of Sergeant Pepper ends in G. And they do about the 2/3 of the way through that song, the reprise, they modulate, they go up a step from F to G. And that's a really, really important moment, because it gets us back to the tonic of the album, if you will. And so it was a really fun kind of exercise, because the they had like a different order for the first side, that they originally had a different order, and it ended with like she's leaving home or something,
Hmm.
and then they switched it, and then the order that is now everybody knows is ends with Mr. Kite of side one, and then the second side was the same the whole time. So um and then the last song, A Day in the Life, it it alternates between G and E, and and the big final chord is an E major chord, which kind of mirrors the E minor ending of side one.
Yeah.
And so those things, those relationships and things were like really, really cool, and really, I think, very well thought out. Um, and it's one of the reasons that I think that album is, it hangs together, and people enjoy it as a listening experience because of this kind of very long-term structural uh long-term structure, I should say. And it sort of brought up, I think for me, it brought up like, are other people talking about song sequence in albums? And if not, why not? And it's kind of an interesting field that I want to explore it more, um, because I think it's relevant, and it's sort of like I made some connections between Sergeant Pepper and like Song Cycles by Schumann and
Yeah.
Schubert, and they were really conscious of key areas, and how the whole thing is going to flow, and this kind of the emotional journey that they take the listener on. And I think listening to an album is very similar to listening to a song cycle, especially because they specifically said, this is an album. We're not going to release any singles from it. You sit there and you listen to it. um,
Yeah.
and so it was a art piece that was a essentially a song cycle, and those are the kinds of things that that paper was about. And it was really fun to work on, you
That's
know.
awesome. I
Yeah.
did listen to my mom had these, well, my parents had um boxes and boxes and boxes of records, and for some
Mhm.
reason I really gravitated towards the Beatles right around the time I was 12 or 13, and Sergeant Pepper and Abbey Road, I think I listened to like
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
um yeah, that's definitely would you call it a concept album? I don't know if that's entirely the right word. There's a word for it when they're all together like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Some people say it's the first concept album. Maybe there's a little bit of truth to that, but I don't think that they really thought of it that way.
Yeah.
But my point is that it works as,
It's a song cycle.
yeah, it works as a unit,
Yeah.
because of that last song, that the Day in the Life. It's like you hit that final chord, and it's like, oh wow, it's sort
Yeah.
of like it sums up the entire journey in a way, just harmonically. And even if you don't know anything about music, it still has that effect, you know.
Yeah.
um and it's interesting, I listened, or I didn't listen to it, but I went through the White Album in the same way. Like I figured out all the key areas and everything, and it's all over the place.
Mm.
There's really no
Mm.
pattern or rhyme or reason, and that's the effect that it has on the listener. It's like,
Right.
oh, this is kind of weird. Oh, that's a cool song, but then this one is totally weird. It's very eclectic and all over the place. And I haven't done the same thing with Abbey Road, but I probably should, because I think it probably hangs together harmonically a
I
bit
have no
better.
idea. I just remember that
Yeah.
it was pleasing to listen to, but that
Yeah.
probably means that there's something in there.
Yeah. Right.
How cool.
Yeah. And so, the song sequence it's something that I think the band slash the producer, they come up with, and they really, I think they really come up with it after.
Yeah.
It's almost like a post-production decision in some cases, unless you have like songs that are meant to be linked together sonically or something. But yeah, it's like I think I read that they always knew that they were going to end with a day in the life, because what could follow that. So that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And they knew they were going to start with Sergeant Pepper. And
Yeah.
then the reprise was kind of an afterthought, actually. It was like that was one of the last things that they recorded. And so they had to do that modulation to bring it to the right key to start A Day in the Life. But it has the effect of like tying up the Sergeant Pepperness.
Right. The Sergeant Pepperness, and then you go out in the world and end up in E.
Yeah. And A Day in the Life, it's like, oh, this is the real world kind of effect.
It's a very chaotic song. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. So do you
So
frequently go to conventions, present? What was that? Was that something that you attend regularly? That's curious.
no, I was so the reason that I found that one was I taught a seminar on the Beatles in the spring of 2023.
Nice.
And so I was looking, like, I think the fall before that, I was saying, oh, there are any Beatles conferences out there? And there happened to be the Popular Culture Association. They occasionally have like a Beatles year, so they have like a bunch of Beatles nerds come and they give presentations on their stuff, and they truly are nerds. They're wonderful people, but like, wow, they know so much about the Beatles. And so this was one of the years, was a Beatles emphasis. There was also a Grateful Dead studies emphasis that same year. So
sounds like different demographics to me.
Yeah, it was. I went to some of their presentations too, and it's the same kind of thing.
Again, stepping outside a little bit, how often do you think yourself, man, I just have the coolest job in the world?
I do pretty often. Yeah, I'm pretty lucky.
That's
great. True. Yeah, it was a fun conference, and I met a lot of great people. I met somebody she's American, but she's actually going to school at the University of Liverpool, getting a master's degree in Beatles studies.
Oh my gosh.
Not kidding. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
They have a degree in Beatles studies.
Have a degree in the Beatles. There's probably going to be a Taylor Swift degree at some point.
Yeah, Swift.
I see it happening.
Swiftology.
We've got Swiftomania right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh, Chris, I could talk to you for a long time. I want to wrap up on a question that I ask every guest. Yes. So there's a phrase that I've started calling a zeitgeist moment. I don't know if there's another word for it, but that feeling when you are just like you're listening to something, or you're writing, or you're performing something, and music, and you just like plug in, you click in, you're part of something bigger than yourself. From my perspective, that's usually what you're plugging into, the zeitgeist, either of the moment or that you're in now, or the time that was before you. So I'm going to ask you, what was either a recent or a memorable zeitgeist moment for you? While you're thinking of that, I'll share one of mine. And I actually want to share that it was a moment in my first class with you, Theory 1, freshman year of college. I had taken piano since I was like 8, so many years, at the time. But I had not really formally studied theory. So this was my first, I could play a lot of pretty stuff, but it wasn't the theoretical knowledge of it. I didn't really have that yet. And I'm pretty sure we were just learning about a 5/1 cadence. It was something very, very simple. And you were there. Who knows how long you taught that, how many times you taught that already, but you were sharing. And actually, you'll probably make me honest on this as far as the exact examples you used. But in my memory, you were using something from like Mozart, 5/1, just a 5/1 cadence. And then you pulled up Rush. I don't remember the exact song, but I remember you were so excited. You
Mhm.
got so excited. I'm like, this guy has taught this. Like, this is so basic. I knew it was basic and it was new to me. And
Mhm.
you got so excited that it was like the rest of the class. Ian and I still remember that moment. And we were just like, the rest of the class were like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Um, because you tied it all together and you made it relevant. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, wait, this could actually be kind of fun. Like, maybe I'm going to
Mhm.
like this theory stuff. I was kind of rolling my eyes. Like, I wanted a minor in music. Okay, I got to take this class.
Mhm.
And, uh,
Mhm.
and that kind of changed, I suddenly like, I clicked in and I got it. I'm like, theory. Okay, this is fun and vibrant. And it's like, useful. So
Yeah.
anyway, that was a zeitgeist moment that I had in one of your classes. So I'd be
Oh, cool.
curious if there's a moment that you think of. It doesn't have to be teaching; it can be literally anything.
Yeah. Well,
Very.
thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's sweet. Um, I've been playing guitar, electric guitar with a friend of mine who also plays electric guitar. So we have a duo and we call ourselves BALD, the Basement Apartment Looping Duo, which spells bald.
Of course.
And and my friend is really into pedals and he loves, all of these crazy echoes and octave duplicators and delays and really washy stuff. And so I just simply, not simply, but I literally just improvise over the top of what he's doing. And so he sets up a chord progression, he loops it, and then he puts on effects and stuff. And then it's pretty much like any note, almost any note in the scale will work. Sometimes the scale changes a little bit, but I think that I was talking with him on the way home from a gig recently, and we were talking about, we just it's okay to have music that doesn't really mean anything. You know, these songs are about the chord progression itself. They're not about anything else. And we don't even have titles for most of them. They're just simply, G, or like FCG is one of the ones that we do.
Right.
And those are literally the chords that we play is FCG. And we have a lot of fun, and people listen to it and they seem to enjoy it, and it doesn't have to mean anything. It's um I'm quoting John Cage, who is quoting Immanuel Kant, and he said the two things that don't have to mean anything is music and laughter. you know
Nice.
and I think there's a lot of truth to that, because I think a lot of us get wrapped up in this whole idea, is like, oh, what does it mean, even like a sculpture,
Right. Right.
a painting. Well, does it really have to mean anything? That's something that I'm not sure where that comes from, like we're like searching for meaning and everything. But I think that we're sort of in our little small way, we're sort of proving the point that it doesn't have to mean anything. It's just simply a chord progression and a scale, you know. And
What a fabulous way to tie up this entire conversation.
yeah, it's like it's
That is
literally,
excellent.
it is what it is. and
Right.
and you can either love it or not, but it doesn't it's not anything other than what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Sounds very freeing, honestly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really fun. And I'm kind of in this sort of headspace, like it's a sort of a zen, very meditative kind of moment when I'm doing that. It's like, now I understand why improvisers, they close their eyes, when
Yeah.
they're improvising, because it really helps. Actually, you don't want to be distracted with anything else. You're just in the moment, and you're playing notes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on my podcast. It was wonderful
You're
to have
welcome.
you.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Zeitgeist Radio. If you'd like to take the next step in your musical journey, head over to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio to join my newsletter. Seriously, it's fun and informative, and I never spam or sell your information. That's zeitgeistacademy.com/radio. Music for this episode was created by Ian Boswell. Please hit that subscribe button and tell all your friends you found a cool new podcast. See you next time.